joining us. We're going to get started in just a few minutes while we wait for everyone to sign on. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to just give it another minute or so while we wait for people to file in. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Hudson Library and Historical Society's author series. Today we are so honored to welcome Dr. Jane Draycott to discuss her upcoming book, Cleopatra's Daughter, From Roman Prisoner to African Queen. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to please check out our website, hudsonlibrary.org. We have so many exciting upcoming programs. Just so much going on, so make sure you check that out so you don't miss what's coming up next. You can pre-order copies of Cleopatra's Daughter from our local independent bookstore, the Learned Owl. The link will be in the chat. The book is coming out May 23rd in the States. And like I said, we'll include the direct link. I read the book and I loved it, so I'm so excited to discuss with you guys tonight, or this afternoon, really. At any point during the event, if you have questions, please leave them in the Q&A section and we'll try to address as many as possible. So now that that's out of the way, let me introduce today's speaker. Dr. Jane Draycott is a lecturer of ancient history at the University of Glasgow. She is a Roman historian and archaeologist and has excavated sites ranging from the Bronze Age villages to World War I trenches, which is fascinating. She's going to be discussing her upcoming book, Cleopatra's Daughter, and it's all about the life of Cleopatra Selene, the daughter of Cleopatra VII and Marcus Antonius, otherwise known as Mark Antony. Thank you, Jane, for joining us this afternoon. Well, evening your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for tuning in today.
Like I said, I really enjoyed this book. It was a topic I'm not as familiar with. I mean, I'm familiar with Cleopatra and her story, but not as familiar with her life as a mother. And I was wondering if you could give people who maybe like me are a little bit unfamiliar some historical context for where we are when this book is taking place.
Right, so I think most people have heard a little something about Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt. So she was the ruler of Egypt in the middle of the 1st century BCE. So from around 51 down to 30, to be specific. And the period of time that is relevant to us today is the lifetime of her daughter, her only daughter. We don't often think about Cleopatra as a mother, and we certainly don't think about her as a mother of 4 children. If she gets talked about as a mother at all, it's generally in relation to her eldest child, and that was Caesarion Ptolemy the 15th Caesar, the son of Julius Caesar. And the sort of the issue, the key issue really in her sort of conflict with Octavian, who would become the first emperor Augustus. But the other 3 children, her 3 children with Mark Antony, they tend to be ignored. And in the case of the 2 boys, Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus, that's understandable because they seem to have died quite young and they didn't really make much of a dent in the historical record. But as far as Cleopatra Selene is concerned, that's a really poor show on behalf of both ancient and modern historians, because she has a really fascinating life, and she goes from strength to strength, and she becomes a queen in her own right, and is actually arguably more successful at being a queen of a Roman client kingdom than her mother was. And so I'm really happy to sort of get a chance to make more people aware of her and talk about her and answer questions about her. And so I should just say, I suppose her life, she's born in 40 and she dies in around 5 BCE. We're not entirely certain about her date of death, but it's around that time.
I know, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about her childhood growing up. I know she would have been about 10 years old, you think, in the Battle of Antietam. So maybe before that? What was her life growing up in Egypt, especially her expectations? I know you said she was declared Queen of Crete and Xenia in her own right. So she fascinating childhood.
Yes, so she's born and is sort of living in a really interesting time for Egypt because at this time Egypt is still a sort of mostly independent kingdom. It's the last one of the kingdoms that were ruled by Alexander the Great's generals and their successors. And all of the rest of these kingdoms have either sort of collapsed due to sort of infighting, or they've been conquered and taken over by Rome. And so Egypt is holding out. And this is one of Cleopatra's motivations, is to try and keep her kingdom independent, try and keep her dynasty on the throne. And so her children are all part of this purpose that she has. And so her eldest son, Caesarion, he is her co-ruler, and he's going to be her heir as well. And the way that the Ptolemies did things was they practiced brother-sister marriage for the most part to sort of keep the dynastic line fairly straightforward. And so it seems like because Cleopatra only has one daughter, it stands to reason that Cleopatra Selene's destiny was originally planned for her to marry her brother Caesarion, and then the pair of them would be king and queen, joint pharaoh of Egypt. But of course, that all does not come to pass because Cleopatra and Mark Antony are defeated at the Battle of Actium in 31, and then the following year, Octavian brings his army to Alexandria, to Egypt, and Cleopatra and Mark Antony commit suicide, and the remaining children, because Caesarion is executed, the younger three children, they are then taken by Octavian back to Rome, and so they no longer have any place in Egypt. So although technically we could perhaps say that, yes, Cleopatra Selene had been made queen of Crete and the Cyrenaica by Antony in the donations of Alexandria in 34, and around then there were a lot of territorial grants that were made. She loses that. She could be said to have been Queen of Egypt after the death of her mother and her elder brother. She loses Egypt too. She gets taken off to Rome, and she spends 5 years living in Octavian's house with his household on the Palatine Hill. And she would have had quite a lot of change, growing up for the first 10 years of her life as a princess in Egypt, in Alexandria, one of the finest and most sophisticated and most cosmopolitan cities in the ancient world, access to the library and all the amazing books that were there, being worshipped essentially as a sort of living goddess, the way that her family were sort of seen to be divine. And then she goes to sort of live in a much humbler household, a lovely elite Roman house, but not the kind of palace she was used to. And she's expected to be a good little Roman girl and not be too noisy and not be too outspoken and not be too much. And so she spends 5 years there, and then she marries, and she and her husband are given the kingdom of Mauritania to go and rule. And so then she goes to Mauritania in North Africa, and finally she is free to live as a queen again, and indulge her desires to create a court and a kingdom that were very much inspired by what she'd known as a child in Alexandria.
I think it's amazing and has to have been a massive, I don't know, not just cultural, but just to go from, like you said, you were being worshipped. You mean you are a queen in your own right. You're expected to take over as Queen of Egypt, and then to go from that to, I don't know, hostage, spoil of war situation where you're now, living, basically as a prisoner in captivity, especially at 10. That's a that's a big life update. And the fact that it sounds like from reading your book that she was able to adjust to life in Roman household, or at least we don't hear that she was not adjusting.
Yes.
Kind of amazing.
I think that what we have to bear in mind, I suppose, is that she would have been a very intelligent child and a very well educated one. We know that the royal children had a lot of tutors who were based at the Great Library, so they would have been taught science and philosophy and literature and all sorts of things like that. So they're intelligent to start with because her parents are intelligent. Cleopatra's intelligent, Antony's intelligent. They're both very educated people. So she had that as her background. But as somebody who would have been trained from very young to be a queen and to be a diplomat, she's being set a very good example by her mother. You know, Cleopatra speaks many languages and doesn't use interpreters to deal with her surrounding sort of neighboring monarchs. You know, she has contact with the Herodian dynasty in Judea. She has contact with, well, the people who are ruling Rome at any given moment, and she has contact with other kingdoms in India through the Red Sea trade route. So Cleopatra Selene is seeing all of this. She's seeing her mother be a very skilled ruler and diplomat, and she's learning how to do this. And then when she goes to Rome, she's still learning because she gets to see how a different civilization and a different political system works, because the Romans don't have kings and queens, but they do have very powerful military leaders, political leaders. And although women do not have a public role in politics or the military in Rome, unlike in Egypt, they do wield influence. They just have to do it sort of through back channels, through networks, and they're meant to help their fathers and their husbands and their sons by sort of being very quietly powerful. And so she's seen her mother wielding power openly, and then she would have seen her foster mother, her stepmother Octavia, and her sort of, I suppose, foster aunt Livia Drusilla, and possibly even her grandmother, because Antony's mother may still have been alive at this point. She will have seen them operating as powerful, influential women in Roman society under a different set of expectations. And so when she goes to Mauritania, she's learned all of this, and she's seen these examples, and so she's able to sort of chart a course between the two, the explicit wielding of power of her mother and the sort of implicit wielding of power of her Roman relations.
One of the things I picked up, and I think maybe it's also because I don't know if it was something that was helpful to her or hurtful to her, especially during her time in Rome, is that Rome had a real big fascination with Egypt. And you touched on the book, and also I was wondering if you could touch about, I don't know, how Egypt, the fascination with Egypt in Roman culture. You talked about Egypt mania, which I thought was fascinating, and our viewers might be interested because the Cleveland Museum of Art also has a whole this exhibit on it right now, which is very interesting, not just in ancient world, but also our current fascination with it and all of that. I was wondering if you could touch on that, because I know that you talked about when she came back and was paraded through and all of the different Egypt iconography that was used throughout Rome and also destroyed. Was she more of a fascination piece, or?
I think there probably was an element of that, because the Romans, they're very xenophobic in a lot of ways. They love Egypt as an idea and a civilization. They don't like Egyptian people. They have lots of sort of very unpleasant ideas about them, that they are shifty and dishonest and thieves, and that they're weak and effeminate and lazy. And these are the sorts of things that Romans say about a lot of different foreign peoples. You know, these are fairly sort of stereotypical ideas, and they're probably very familiar to us still today with certain groups of foreigners. You know, you have certain stereotypes, So the Romans don't like Egyptians, but they do like Egypt, and they find Egypt's culture very interesting. They find the architecture, the pyramids and the obelisks. They're really interested in those. And actually, Octavian does asset strip Egypt once he's in control of it. Not only does he take sort of the natural resources, the grain and the precious metals and the minerals from Egypt, because it's a very wealthy kingdom. He also takes specific things, specific objects of art. And so this is why there are so many obelisks in Rome today, because Octavian stole them and brought them over to decorate his capital city as victory. So Egypt becomes very sort of fashionable and sexy and cool in the wake of the Battle of Actium and the annexation of the kingdom. So we see not only does Octavian decorate Rome with Egyptian stuff, but elite Romans want to do the same thing. So we see people who are associated with Octavian and with the sort of conquest of Egypt at this time. There's a tomb in Egypt that is the tomb of Cestius, and it's a pyramid. He is friendly with Octavian and with Agrippa, Octavian's general, and who really masterminded the victory. And so he builds his tomb in the form of a pyramid. We see people decorating their houses with frescoes depicting the Nile and Egyptian wildlife. We see mosaics doing the same. Gardens are very common locations for artwork and frescoes like this as well. It's this sort of outdoor, natural, relaxing place to be. And so, yeah, Egypt is very fashionable to the Romans. And so Cleopatra Selene, coming from Egypt, she would have been inherently interesting to the Romans because she is the daughter of Antony, one of the most famous, important, high-profile Romans, but one who had disgraced himself by going native when, leaving all of his Roman ways behind and taking on the Egyptian ways. I mean, this is Octavian's propaganda against Antony, but it seems to have been very influential. And also Cleopatra too, because although the Romans, they didn't like her for a variety of reasons. She was foreign, she was a woman, she was a queen. She dared to think that she could be the equal to Octavian, to Antony, that Egypt could be the equal to Rome, that it might even take Rome over. So Cleopatra Selene has this very interesting, this very sort of mysterious and appealing sort of heritage surrounding her. There's this sort of mystique, I suppose, because yeah, she's brought to Rome. She's put on display in Octavian's triumph next to an effigy of her mother. So people would have been aware of who she was and what she was and what she represented. And yeah, she would have been living with Octavian and his family. She's simultaneously, she's a member of the Roman elite. She's related to Julius Caesar and these very powerful Roman people, and she's right at the heart of this, living in Octavian's house on the Palatine Hill. Yet at the same time, there's this issue of, well, she's a prisoner. She's been defeated. She has to do what Octavian says. Can she be Romanized? Can she be made useful to Rome? Is she like her mother? Is she going to be a problem? And so she has to bear all of that in mind when she decides to act as first a child and a teenager in Rome, and then later when she's an adult in Mauritania.
I just find that fascinating to think of how much she was juggling and how much, I don't know, eyes are on you, and to try to be both, especially at such a young age, is fascinating. The fact that she was able to do it is amazing.
I think if she'd have ever been a problem, we'd have heard about it in the sources.
Yeah,
because they would not have hesitated to say anything negative about her. I mean, we see with Octavian's daughter Julia, when she creates a scandal, gets involved in a conspiracy, commits adultery, has lovers, etc. We hear all about it. We hear so much about Julia's transgressions and how shameful it is, and how Octavian sort of viewed her as a sort of a cancer. And so if Cleopatra Selene had done anything untoward, we'd have absolutely heard about it, and we don't hear about it. So we have to assume that she was behaving herself. She was able to be everything that was expected of her, whatever she might privately have thought of that. You know, obviously we don't know what that is, but she clearly was playing the part that was expected of her and playing it well.
I was going to say, the lack of record, Romans loved a good scandal, and they were not afraid to publicly, glorify all of the juicy details. So the fact that there's not we don't have any of those stories, to me makes it feel like, she was, she fit in.
We have almost the opposite. Like when she is mentioned, she's praised very highly. The poems that are written upon her marriage to Juba and upon her premature death, these are very respectful, honorific poems. So whatever she's doing, she's impressing the people around her and who are sort of writing these sorts of materials.
I was wondering, you brought up her marriage, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about it. In a lot of ways, her husband, Juba, is very similar to her background. He was also a prisoner when his father, the king of Numidia, he was on the wrong side in the Civil War, and he was defeated. Juba was captured. I mean, he was taken prisoner when he was a baby. So he grew up his whole life basically under Roman rule. I was wondering, could you talk a bit about their marriage and what that represented for her?
So on paper, they look like soulmates, really, more in tune with each other than most ancient married couples, because they pretty much had the exact same life experience, all of the same difficulties. So yes, Juba's father was likewise a king of a North African kingdom. He was allied with Rome, and we hear about him in the sources of the late Republic, much earlier, before any of this has happened. And he's actually he's not particularly well thought of, and he's in the sources we get a few sort of references. Julius Caesar pulls his beard on one occasion, and Cicero makes sort of racist comments about his hair. And so he's clearly not being treated with much respect when he is involved with the Romans. And eventually, yes, he picks the wrong side in the Civil War. He like Cleopatra takes his own life when he's defeated, and so Julius Caesar takes his kingdom, takes everything, including his infant son. And so Juba gets taken to Rome. He gets exhibited in Julius Caesar's triumph. He's very young. He's a toddler at the time, so he didn't really have the same awareness of it that Cleopatra Selene did. And he grows up in Rome, and he's given Roman citizenship, and he's taught to read and write and speak Latin and Greek, and he's encouraged to be a scholar. He's a polymath, really. He has a lot of different areas of scholarship that he works in. And so later on, after his death, he's sort of said that he was more famous for his scholarship than he was for his reign and his kingdom. So he grows up first in Caesar's house, then in Octavia's house. And so he very possibly had spent time with Antony during the period where Antony and Octavia were married. And so he's a bit older than Cleopatra Selene. He's sort of not somewhere between sort of 5 and 10 years older than her. I mean, we don't know exactly when he was born, roughly, in his sort of early 20s or so, when they marry and become king and queen of Mauritania. So he would have been able to tell her things about the father that she had not really spent much time with. And he would have been able to sympathize and empathize with her when, you know, she's taken away from everything she knows from her kingdom, from her culture, and she's brought to Rome. And he would have been able to sort of say to her, yes, this happened to me too, and my father was disgraced like your parents, and I've had this follow me around the way that you have it follow you around. And so the pair of them, I think, would have been able to understand each other in a way that other of their contemporaries perhaps couldn't quite manage to. And we're told that Octavia was the matchmaker between them, and it's certainly very convenient. I mean, at the time that Cleopatra Selene and Juba are married, there are other marriages taking place in the imperial family, but all the youngsters are roughly the same age. You have Octavian's daughter Julia, you have his wife's two sons, Tiberius and Drusus, you have Octavia's daughters, who are both called Antonia. There are other young members of this very large extended family. So they're all getting married at roughly the same time. And so Juba and Cleopatra Selene are matched and married, and then they're given Mauritania as their wedding present, and they're sent off to rule it. So Cleopatra Selene would have been Queen of Egypt, but Egypt has taken. Juba would have been King of Numidia. Numidia has been taken, but the pair of them are given Mauritania, which is a vast territory, roughly akin to what we know today as Morocco and Algeria. And it's the only client kingdom in the Roman West. There are quite a few in the East, but it's the only one in the West. And it's sort of, it is the barrier between Rome, particularly the provinces where Spain and Portugal are today, which are very important. So it's the barrier between Rome and then the rest of Africa. And so it's very important as a sort of a frontier and a way to sort of keep incursions, barbarian incursions, sort of out of Rome. And so yes, they go off to Mauritania in around let's see, 25 BCE, and then they sort of spend the next couple of decades ruling that kingdom together.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit about their rule in Mauritania, and especially about Cleopatra Selene's influence and like her leadership style, because I know it's mentioned a lot that she was in charge of their capital city while her husband was out either on a military type campaign, protecting their borders, or was doing a lot of research and writing and stuff.
So it seems like they actually have a very interesting marriage. And just as we can sort of infer that Cleopatra Selene was very intelligent and very well educated, we know that Juba was. We have the evidence of it in the remains of his scholarship. And it seems that his intelligence extends to recognizing that of the two of them, Cleopatra Selene is the much more important, prestigious partner. So she is not only descended from she's a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, descended all the way down from Ptolemy the First, who there was some sort of gossip about him actually being the half brother of Alexander the Great, and so that's a way of sort of promoting the Ptolemaic dynasty and Ptolemy's claim to Egypt. So she has these very significant links through her mother to Ptolemy, to Alexander, to Philip of Macedon as well. The Ptolemies also claim to be descended from Hercules, Heracles, so divine ancestry too. Her father, Antony, is a member of one of the very ancient Roman families. She's also related to the Julian family through Antony's mother, her grandmother. And in addition to that, she is related to the imperial family as well, because Antony had been married to Octavian's sister Octavia and had two children with her. So Cleopatra Selene's half-sisters, Antonia's, they marry into Octavian's, one of them marries Octavian's stepson, and subsequently her children are emperors, and so Cleopatra Selene is directly related to the very heart of imperial power She has this ancient Roman lineage, this ancient Macedonian lineage. She has this divine lineage because both the Ptolemies and Antony himself as well claimed descent from Hercules. So Juba, he's the son of a king, but that's it, you know. And so she, and then Cleopatra Selene herself, of course, had been a queen. Juba was never king of anything. His kingdom was taken when he was a baby, whereas Cleopatra Selene had nominally been queen of Crete and Cyrenaica, queen of Egypt. And so I think he recognizes there that he's actually, it's in his interest to promote her. And so what we see in their joint rule of the kingdom is, and it is, they are ruling, and they're ruling together. We can see it in their coinage because Juba is on one side, Cleopatra Selene is on the other. They issue joint coinage, but she also issues her own coinage, and this is something that Roman women were not doing. They could not do at this point in time. If they were lucky, they might get included on their husband's coinage. So Antony is the first Roman to start including the women in his life on his coin. So he depicts his wife Fulvia, his wife Octavia, and Cleopatra on his coinage. And that's very sort of transgressive for him to do that. So we can see in the numismatic evidence that Cleopatra Selene is very important in the kingdom. And then we can look at the archaeological remains of the kingdom itself, and we can see that it's very heavily influenced by Rome. You know, it's a Roman client kingdom, so you'd expect to see Roman things in it, Roman buildings, Roman architecture. We also see Egypt as well, and that's a little bit more surprising because, well, why would we see Egypt in Mauritania? What does Juba have to do with Egypt? Nothing. As far as we know, he hadn't even been there at that point in his life. So the only place that the Egyptian stuff, you know, the Egyptian art and architecture and religious practices can be coming from, that's got to be Cleopatra Selene. It's got to be her influence and her desire to turn Caesarea, their capital city, into another version of Alexandria, and to make their kingdom a new sort of Egypt, or type of Egypt, a way of continuing the Ptolemaic dynasty. And we even see they name their son Ptolemy. So the king after Juba is King Ptolemy, and that's from Cleopatra Selene's family. It's not from Juba's family. So yeah, he doesn't even name his son after himself and his family. He names his son after his wife's family. So clearly there is this recognition by him that she is extremely important and much appreciated, you know, for everything that she brings to their marriage and to their joint project of this kingdom.
I was gonna say the naming of their son speaks volumes. With, I mean, she clearly, if you're going to outrank someone, she's the heavyweight in that relationship by far. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about her before we turn over, because we have a bunch of audience questions. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, and not in the chat, in the Q&A section, sorry. And we'll try to get to as many as possible. Before I wrap up, I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about her leadership style, and especially compared to her mother, because you said Cleopatra Selene is a bit better at being a ruler of a client kingdom than her mother, and what that looked like.
I think, again, this is sort of inference, really, because the Roman writers in this period are interested in what's happening in Rome. They are only interested in what's happening in the client kingdoms and in the provinces if there's a problem. So if there's some kind of dynastic crisis, or if there's some kind of revolt. And we don't seem to have anything like that happening in Mauritania. So whatever's going on in Mauritania, it's happy, you know, it's competent, it's not causing anybody any grief. And so we can then see that, well, what Mauritania is being ruled competently, it's being ruled well. There are issues as far as tribal incursions are happening, and there's a lot of sort of military activity happening in North Africa at this point. And Juba himself is part of this. He is having to protect the frontier, protect the border, and he's going to war quite a bit with tribes. and he's being rewarded for that with triumphal regalia and pre plaudits and things by Augustus, and then by Augustus's successor Tiberius. So Juba's doing all of that. It stands to reason that if Juba's out of Caesarea, away from the sort of the coast where the city is, that Cleopatra Selene is the one that's actually dealing with the day-to-day ruling of Mauritania in his absence. And it does seem that she is able to do this without causing any problems. She's not only is she able to issue her coins and get things from Egypt and bring them to Mauritania, she's doing this without annoying Augustus. They're doing enough in Mauritania to keep Augustus happy. So he doesn't see her as any sort of threat to himself and to his possession, or Rome's possession of Egypt, the way that Cleopatra was seen as a threat and seen as going beyond what was an acceptable amount of sort of power and influence for a client ruler. And we hear about other client kingdoms having a lot of dynastic strife, murders, assassinations, marriage, divorce, etc. And we don't hear about that from Mauritania either. And so, yes, I think it's fair to say that she saw the examples that had been set for her, by her mother, by her aunts as well. In their, her aunt Berenike, her aunt Arsinoe, who had attempted to gain control of Egypt when they were not supposed to, and they had both been executed as a result of that. And she saw how successful Octavia and Livia could be in Rome. They could have great building projects and religious influence and things like that. So I think she learned her lessons, and she saw the good and the bad examples that had been set for her, and was able to follow them, and for 20 years successfully be Queen of Mauritania and do what her mother had wanted to do, which was continue the Ptolemaic dynasty. And the Ptolemaic dynasty ends really with her son Ptolemy, because he's executed by Caligula, but that's not anything to do with him really. It's more to do with a sort of paranoid, murderous emperor who murders a lot of other people, a lot of other family members. So she had at least ensured the Ptolemaic dynasty for another generation.
Yeah, I was going to say that the last one was more on, he had some other issues, which is why he was executed young. Let me turn over. We have so many great questions in the Q&A, so I'd love to get to some of them for you. We have a lot of people who wanted to know, and I also had the same question, what drew you to the topic of Cleopatra's daughter, and what kind of resources were available for you to build her story? Because you mentioned in the book that it's hard to build stories for some of these women at this time. What was available and what drew you to it?
Well, I was doing my PhD on Greco-Roman Egypt in the first place, so I was very interested in just learning as much as I could about Egypt during the Ptolemaic period, during the Roman period afterwards, and I was never really interested in Cleopatra, because it's that kind of thing that you just think, oh, that's so done. There are so many books about Cleopatra. there are so many TV shows and films and everything else about Cleopatra, and it's all very, it's all the same stuff. But then I found out about her daughter, and I came to Cleopatra Selene in a roundabout way, because part of my PhD I was researching animal ingredients in Egyptian medicine, and crocodile ingredients, crocodile fat, crocodile scales. They get used in crocodile gets used in Egyptian medicine. And Cleopatra Selene used the crocodile as a personal sort of symbol on her coinage. And crocodiles are quite important in Mauritania as well. They bring some and they keep them in the temple of Isis. And so I kind of came to Cleopatra Selene sort of in a roundabout way through crocodiles, and then finding her and thinking, oh, well, here is something about Cleopatra that I didn't know and that isn't widely known. That's interesting. And so I just started to try and look for as much evidence as I could find about her. So I read the ancient sources, and I looked for where she's mentioned in the literature, and I looked in the archaeological record. I looked for the coins. I looked for the anything else I could find, in art and inscriptions and things like that. And I think I was able to put together a fairly detailed sort of timeline for her. And there are ancient people who are far more famous than she is that we know far less about. If you think about Boudica, for example, everybody has heard of Boudica and her sort of war against the Romans, but we don't actually know very much about Boudica at all. And so it was interesting to me that we have here is somebody that we have a lot more evidence for in both literature and archaeology, but for whatever reason she's not been done to death the way that someone like Cleopatra or Boudica has been, and so that interested me.
Let's say I was vaguely aware of her, but I didn't know much, and so this has been, I really enjoyed the book, and like highlighting parts, like it's a well-known beginning, it's a well-known story that I was familiar with, but like I didn't know what happened next to her children. I vaguely remember them in the background, and to hear of her daughter and what she went on to achieve was very interesting. Let's see here. Mary would like to know, and I should clarify because you have people asking in the chat, Octavian is Augustus, the first Roman Empire, same person. People wanted to clarify if there was confusion on that. Could you talk a little bit about her marriage and the setup? Why were they paired up? Was it arranged? I mean, was Octavian's, I don't know, thinking behind it, I guess logic between the pairing of those two?
Well, for starters, Roman girls have to get married. It is just not single Roman girls and women who never marry. That is pretty much unheard of. The only way a Roman girl is escaping marriage is if she dies quite young. That is just what Roman women do, and they were doing it before Octavian became emperor. And once he becomes emperor, in the first few years of his reign, we call that the Principate, he passes a lot of laws that actually are very invasive in ancient Roman private life. They're dictating who you can and can't marry. They're dictating that if you are divorced or widowed, you have a set amount of time and then you have to get married again. They give you privileges. If the more children you have, the more privileges you get. So at the time that she was sort of coming to sort of maturity, to adulthood, there was just no way that she could escape being married because legally it was a requirement. And in addition to that, well, Octavian needed to control her. He her safe from anyone who might want to use her against him, because of course she was still she still had claim to Egypt. She could still make problems, and if somebody, the wrong person, married her, they could use her as a way of getting control of Egypt and being some sort of enemy or rival to Octavian. So it's in his interest, since she has to be married, it's in his interest to marry her to somebody close to him, somebody trustworthy. And Juba is very well suited to her for all the reasons that we've discussed, who he is and what his life has been. And he is somebody that, although he had been a foreigner and he had been a prisoner, that was when he was so young that he was just brought up to be a Roman. He was raised like any other Roman, and he did everything that was expected of him as a Roman. So he's safe. He's been safe. Octavian wouldn't have given him Mauritania, this huge, wealthy, important kingdom that was protecting Rome's sort of southern border. And so I think it was probably, yeah, I mean, we hear in the sources that Octavia was the matchmaker. That's perhaps romanticizing it a little bit. I mean, she may have suggested, oh, yeah, they get on very well, they're very well suited. So but it wasn't arranged marriage, because Roman elite marriages were always arranged. It was always a question of aligning the family with another family. It was about money and property and all sorts of other things. It wasn't about like love. If love was sort of, it was expected to sort of come later. You know, marriage was meant to be a partnership between husband and wife. They were meant to love each other and treat each other with sort of respect and support each other. But that was not the reason that Roman people got married. And so it seems like they have this arranged marriage. It's too perfectly convenient for it to not have had a sort of degree of arrangement to it. But as I said, the sort of the day-to-day realities of their marriage that we can tell from the archaeological record, clearly it's a marriage that works, where they both have respect for each other, and they're working together to achieve their aims.
I was gonna say their background stories match up. It's like on paper, you're like, yes, like your background. I mean, granted, Juba was so young, but like to have someone that had a very similar story, maybe don't remember all of it, is amazing. I was wondering, I see here, we have someone else who would like to know if you could talk a little bit about her son, and did she have any other children? And after her death, can you talk a little bit about what happened to her kingdom, Martoba?
So we know that she definitely has one son called Ptolemy. He rules, after her death, he rules alongside Juba. And then after Juba's death, he rules Mauritania himself for another sort of 18 years. And so that's something that we definitely know. It seems that they did have other children, although we don't know so much about them, because there's a reference in a later source to either a granddaughter of Antony and Cleopatra or a great-granddaughter of Antony and Cleopatra. And so it seems that Cleopatra, Selene, and Juba must have had at least one daughter, and that there are some inscriptions to a African princess in Athens that are thought to possibly be Juba's daughter. So his daughter with Cleopatra Selene. And so they have a daughter, maybe more daughters. I mean, the thing is that Romans are not particularly interested in girls. They don't tend to follow the female family tree. So we know about this mysterious granddaughter, great-granddaughter, because there's a sort of throwaway reference to her in relation to her marriage. So beyond the fact that she existed, we don't really know anything about her, although you can, there is a sort of a theory that you can follow that line of descent through a marriage in the East and further down into sort of later antiquity, but it's not sort of definitive. And so it stands to reason that they did have more children because of how old they were. I mean, Cleopatra Selene dies around about the age of 35, and because there's no reference to her being, assassinated or anything like that, it's possible that she died in childbirth, because that's just something that happens to ancient women. It's a sort of normal fact of life that this is a very high risk activity for them. So that may have been the cause of her death, but we know that she died, and we know that everyone's very sad about it. We just don't know any more details about it than that. So after her death, we have Juba ruling Mauritania, first by himself and then in conjunction with Ptolemy. He leaves the kingdom for a little while. He goes on a tour of the East with Gaius, one of Octavian's grandsons, who he then adopts as his heir. Gaius dies quite young, unfortunately, so that doesn't really amount to anything. Juba is briefly married to somebody else, but divorces her within a sort of a year or two and then returns to Mauritania. And what we know at that point is that Juba and Ptolemy are still using Cleopatra Selene and her prestige as a way of bolstering themselves. So they have statues, sculptures of her around the court. They keep her coinage in circulation because we have coins from a coin hoard of a later date, and so they're still kind of using her to sort of support them, to add luster to them. Ptolemy particularly, he is very keen on the imagery of Heracles. He uses the club of Heracles on a lot of his coins. So he's learned from his mother about having symbols and motifs, and he's using his mother's reputed descent from Heracles on both the Ptolemaic and the Antonian sides of her family tree. So they don't forget her.
No, I was going to say the fact that they kept the coinage still in circulation and continue to reference it shows, to me, at least she was well respected, well thought of, because you'd be quick to stop that if it was otherwise. Goodness knows other people's coins were stopped quickly upon their death. And their images.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a way of Ptolemy adding to his own individual prestige as well, to be able to say, I am a member of this family, stretching all the way back to first to Ptolemy Alexander the Great, but then beyond that to Heracles as well. So yes, he is he has a vested interest in keeping the memory of his mother alive.
For sure, because he can claim to all of that dynastic heritage.
And she's his link with the imperial family as well. She is his link with the emperors Tiberius and then Caligula, and ultimately his relationship with Caligula goes south. But she gives him sort of entree into the very heart of the Roman imperial family and Roman politics.
We have someone who wanted to know about, we know she was no longer Queen of Egypt, she was removed. Was there any Egyptian records or references to Cleopatra Selene during this time when she was queen? Is there any reference to her?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, the evidence that we have for Egypt in this period, it comes in the form of sort of papyri and ostraca, and Octavian is very possessive of Egypt. He has some issues with one of the people that he appoints to rule Egypt, or to sort of run Egypt as a Roman province. And he has Cornelius Gallus is this guy's name, and he oversteps what Octavian thinks is acceptable for him to do, and he has to commit suicide. So Octavian's very possessive of Egypt, and so he wouldn't be reminding people of Cleopatra, of her children. He puts his name and his cartouche and his imagery all over the Egyptian temples. He lays claim to a lot of Cleopatra's building projects and puts his name on them and makes out that he actually built them. So it's not something that we would expect to see. There may well have been people who did remain loyal the deposed dynasty, but they were quiet about it, if so. But it would be great to find in a rubbish dump somewhere in Egypt some papyri that do specifically mention any of Cleopatra and her children, and that would be an amazing find.
So that would be amazing. I'm sure there was some awareness, but I don't think people are going to be very public with that. Wouldn't work out well for them.
I think she's definitely having communication with Egypt, because she's getting the Egyptian material from somewhere. She's getting the Egyptian statues and everything. So she must have contacts in Egypt who are doing her these favors. But yes, as with so much of the stuff we would love to have survived from antiquity, it doesn't seem to have done, unfortunately.
Just add it to the list.
Mm.
It's a very large list. And then we have time for, I think, for one more. There's a whole bunch of resurgence. Recently, there's a trend in especially historical fiction where Cleopatra Selene is coming up more. There's several different fiction books, which I can picture the cover, but not the title of right now.
I've read a couple of them. Yeah,
I mean, she's a fascinating person, as I mean, you've heard today, and especially in the book. I mean, goodness knows she has enough you could write about what she went through. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what is drawing more people, I guess, modern writers towards her.
Well, we are in a, it seems to be very fashionable at the moment for Greek mythological retellings that have women at their center as their main characters. And I think that it's a sort of similar thing, really, is that we're looking to the past, like parts of the past that we're very familiar with, and we're looking for new ways into those. So as far as the Roman Republic, the fall of the Roman Republic is concerned, it's normally told through a sort of political military lens about the men and their debates in the Senate and their battles. But of course there were women there too, and they were doing other stuff that was interesting, and they sort of felt the consequences of this battle's lost, oh no, but it has actual real world ramifications for the wives, the daughters, etc., of the people involved. And so for Cleopatra Selene, I think there are a couple of sort of related things there. The first is that we know enough about her life to create a timeline of it, and she has a very interesting life with a lot of quite significant dramatic things that happen to her. Her parents meet, and her conception is dramatic. The defeat of Antony and Cleopatra and their suicides, so her loss of her parents and her oldest brother and her half brother, that's very dramatic. Being taken to Rome and displayed in a triumph, dramatic. Being married to somebody and made a queen of a different kingdom, also dramatic, and so on and so forth. So these are very nice set pieces to have. But because we don't know huge amounts of detail, there's so much space there for a writer to think, well, I can give her a personality. I can put words in her mouth. I can think about how she might have dealt with these events and what she might have thought about it. And that's something that is harder to do with someone like, for example, Cicero, who we have so many of his speeches and so many of his letters, and we know what he was like as a person, and we know what he was doing and when he was doing it and why he was doing it, because he writes in detail about it. So that's perhaps easier in some ways. If you're not a particularly creative person, you can just use all that historical material as instead of your imagination. But if you want to tell sort of an interesting personal story, then you want someone more like Cleopatra Selene, where you can fill in the gaps yourself. And as long as it sort of makes narrative sense, you can say whatever you like. You can make her a heroine, you can make her a villain if you want to. And I know that there are a couple of different ways of dealing with her relationship with Juba. There's the love story, and then there's the sort of the enemies and the horrible arranged marriage approach. So that's equally something that you can do things with. And so I think it's part of a broader pattern of let's look at ancient history in a different way. Let's look at ancient women and let's give them some agency, because they did have interesting, colorful lives. And yeah, we've read all about Cleopatra. We have not really read all about Cleopatra Selene, so let's make some stories about her. And so people have been doing that, and yeah, they're great.
I mean, for a writer, I mean, goodness gracious, even just take the first 10 years of her life, there's enough drama going on there that you're set.
Absolutely. So and it's the kind of drama that is much more sort of personal and emotional and much more interesting to write about than a battle scene where it's like sword thrust and shield wallop and I mean, obviously some people like to write that, some people like to read that, but there are plenty of people who don't. So this is something for them.
And for someone who lived, I think you said about 35 years, was around the time when she died. I mean, yeah, you have actually an abundance of stories you could focus on.
Highs and lows, sometimes she's a victim, sometimes she's a victor. It's good stuff. I'm really surprised there hasn't been a film, to be honest, or a TV series or a film. She gets cut out of all of the other TV series and films that deal with this period. They tend to focus on her mother, or they tend to focus on, there's the new series Domina that focuses on Olivia. She's cut out of that. And so we need a TV series or a film about her, because this is something that people are familiar with, the broad outlines, but they haven't seen this story told. So
and the fact that she's there during all these big moments that we've heard so much about, she's there and she's being personally affected by most of it. We did have someone, this might be a good one to end on, Lee wants to know, if you were to make a movie out of your book, or if they were to do it, do you have someone you would like to see play her?
It is difficult, actually. There's a Netflix documentary that's coming out soon about Cleopatra, and you probably heard about it in the US. We've certainly heard a lot about it over here. It's very controversial because of who they've cast to play Cleopatra, and this is the interesting thing about this whole period, because if you choosing an actress to play this character, to play Cleopatra Selene, you have to make choices about things like, well, what do we want her to look like, and what do we want that to represent? And also, if we're going from when she's born through when she's 10 through when she's 35, the same actress can't play the 10-year-old and the 35-year-old, so we need different ones. So I don't know, to be perfectly honest. I've always thought that Russell Crowe would make a fantastic Antony, both when he was in Gladiator as Antony at the peak of his success, and then as he is in more recent years, when he played Zeus in Thor: Love and Thunder. That Antony at the end of his life, when his military success starts to ebb away. So he's always been Antony's been easy for me to cast, but Cleopatra Selene is very difficult. And yes, I don't know. Juba is also a bit easier. I think Daniel Kaluuya would be a fantastic Juba. Chiwetel Ejiofor a few years ago, but he's a bit too old now to be young Juba, whereas I think Daniel Kaluuya could be young Juba. But yes, it's so different. I would love it. I would love it to be a TV series or a movie. It would be absolutely fantastic, I think. And yes, I agree. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of young actresses that could do it really well, and it would be a really good role for them, because there is so much that they could do with it.
Yeah, you have enough. You could do dramatic scenes. It's her life the whole time. I'm like, I don't know why I'm not hearing more about this. She's there all these times. I encourage you all. Thank you for joining us, and I encourage you all to check out Cleopatra's Daughter when it comes out. I think it's May 23rd. Let me double check. I don't want to tell you the wrong date. You can pre-order the book from our independent bookstore, The Learned Owl. Yep, May 23rd. The book is fascinating. And it's just, especially if you're someone who enjoys this time period, to read about someone who maybe you don't know as much about, and who was, like I said, she was there and being affected for a lot of it. And a lot of the key figures from Roman history she's personally interacting with, being conquered by, she's there for all of it. So I encourage you all to check out this book. And Jane, it's been an absolute delight talking with you this afternoon.
Thank you. If anybody does get the book and would like a signed book plate, I'm happy to sort of sign one and send it out to you. So you can just find me on social media or email me, and we can arrange that. But yes, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for everyone who's attended, and thank you for all the fantastic questions. It's always so much fun to just discuss this with people.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye.